Such was the surface. Beneath, it possessed great virtues. In the first place, the sense of respect, then the instinct, the taste, and the passion for becoming rich and of rising in the world. Patience, frugality, and honesty. It was in no hurry and was content to work for the future. To a king who knew how to humor him, he did not refuse to lend his money, provided he was satisfied that he got something in exchange. He but rarely gave his blood because he could make no profit out of it, and because it was the business of a gentleman. But let him be ennobled, and he will show that courage is learned much more quickly than fine manners. The less important the privileges which he has won, the more he holds to them. If they are touched, he is incensed. It is not he who of himself caused the revolution at the outset. He followed in the wake of a few broken and bankrupt nobles who showed the way. Then he seized his own advantage, but only because the king and the nobility gave up the struggle to induce him to wish for change and then to work for it. It was necessary that those whose whole interest was to avoid a change should be the first to preach it. That those who had to watch over the principle of authority should employ all their weapons to destroy it. Up to this time, the real Third Estate was passive and took no leading part in the movement. A constitutional monarchy would have completely satisfied it, because in that form of government, it foresaw its own access to power. For the king, whom it looked on as outside the question, it preserved, after 3 years of revolution, a sort of respectful devotion. From 1792 to 1798, 3 electoral coups d'etat were necessary to put an end to the expression of its loyalty. The massacre of September, the 13th Vendemiaire, and the 18th Fructidor. The Third Estate, as well as the nobility, had its defections, but these, in either case, were entitled to speak for their order, which they had disowned, or which disowned them. The Third Estate as a body was royalist, and remained so. Below the Third Estate, still lower down, was the people, who, on solemn occasions, to the sound of peals of bells through a golden dust surrounded by glittering steel, got a glimpse of the supernatural king, loaded with gold, resplendent with precious stones, who passed like a flash of lightning, drawn by 8 horses in a coach of gold. No near approach was possible, nor contact even by chance, except on the day when that king, the elect of God, returning from the altar and consecrated with the triple anointing, touched with the hand the hideous wounds of the poorest of his subjects, and cured them. He appeared only on religious festivals or in military ceremonies in the former as a priest king. In the latter as the inheritor, a conqueror, the chief and leader of the men of the sword, the heaven-appointed defender of his people. That part of his everyday life which he had in common with ordinary beings had no existence for the crowd. Such a notion, and of the nobility which alone confers every right, usurps every privilege, is the cause of every act of tyranny, corrupts every mind, and which of that France, given over to stock jobbers, to thieves, and to bakers, makes an immense marketplace where everything is for sale. The country, justice, law, honor, everything except glory. The man of glory has appeared, who after the 10 years during which parliamentary despotism and the anarchy of the sovereign assemblies lasted, humored the disgust of the people, the roll of a drum, the display of a few grenadiers in the orangerie of St. Cloud. And all was over. And at the same moment, money recognized its master, him who alone it could not buy. For all the gold in the world could not purchase Montanati or Rivoli. But to reconstruct a France, nothing but those ragged togas soaked with gore and mud, which in the park where the 500 have thrown them away in flight, make here and there a red spot which still resembled blood. With nothing a nation was to be restored. To that end give back faith, which makes priests, honor, which makes soldiers, honesty, which is the bond of individuals and of civilized nations before everything. And as a beginning, it was necessary to restore that principle of authority which for 80 years past kings, queens, ministers, and courtiers as if an emulation had been so relentless to discredit and destroy before even it had fallen so low as to be the prey of imbeciles, incapables, and madmen. But how was this principle of authority to be restored to that pitch of power which it naturally possessed under the kings? No doubt, the general of Italy and of Egypt brings his great personal influence to strengthen the supreme magistracy with which he is invested. No doubt, it is founded on the unanimous suffrage of a nation thirsting for security for the present and for some time to come. No doubt his person is adored by the army and by a portion of the people, but how little does this amount to in comparison with that aggregate of power which the last of the Bourbon kings possessed virtually without any trouble to themselves by the mere fact of their birth, which, in spite of their mistresses and their wives, allowed them to reign for 60 years. To the principle of authority, as represented by Bonaparte, a divine institution is wanting. It does not carry with it the nobility, whose loyalty is incorruptible. It is wanting in that majestic remoteness, that retreat into time and space which make of the sovereign, who has become, as it were, a creature of the imagination and of dreams, the inevitable, unquestioned, irresponsible, the almost impersonal master of his people. It was only by degrees that Napoleon broke through these limitations, and only in proportion to the increase of his power. At the outset, a magistrate appointed by the people and sharing, at least nominally, the exercise of that sovereign power, he was, by the express terms of the Constitution, only one member of a government appointed for 10 years, eligible for re-election indefinitely. It is true, but subject, in the same way as his colleagues, to that necessity of re-election, which is the true characteristic of a republican form of government. His new form of authority could have nothing in common with royalty. Its legal power had its origin in the sovereignty of the nation, and in fact, it is the army, that is to say force, which established it. It is by the consent of the people and by force that it is maintained.